And actually, I think that might have been part of the reason non-monogamy was a little bit attractive to me, because I was coming out of my vow of chastity, but also still didn't necessarily want to jump right into having sex. And I was of an age where there was a little bit more of an expectation of like, there's going to be a sexual relationship. And so having like, oh, he can have sex with this other partner of his, and then we can kind of take things at a pace that feels comfortable for me. I think that that was part of the appeal of it.
Welcome to Normalizing Non-Monogamy, the podcast where we interview incredible people from all over the world to hear their personal journeys of self-discovery through the lenses of love, sex, and relationships.
Our mission is to show people that they're not alone and to inspire them to embrace their true selves so that together we can open minds and live authentically without shame.
We believe everyone's story is powerful and beautiful, yet it's important to remember that everyone does life a little bit differently and that the views and opinions expressed by our guests do not necessarily reflect our own.
Additionally, we aren't doctors. Please consult a medical professional for anything regarding your health that you might learn about on the show. Enjoy!
Well, welcome to episode 336. We're Finn and Emma, and today we have a wonderful conversation with Kat. Kat identifies as polyamorous and queer and has been on this incredible journey throughout her life, really coming into who she is and finding her true authentic self.
Yeah, I think this is a super fun conversation. We get to go all around the world. We get to spend some time in Scotland, some time in Singapore, some time all over the place. We also get to hang out with the Baptist church for a little bit.
Yes, as you kind of got a preview from in the little intro blurb.
Yeah, so we've covered ground with Kat from growing up in the Baptist church, having a vow of chastity, to her first real sex experience was in a threesome, and then exploring kink and different variations of non-monogamy, again, all over the world. An amazing story, and just super grateful to Kat for reaching out, for coming on the show, for sharing her story, and also for being a part of our community.
Yes. Amazing. Kat is also a therapist working in California and is always open to more clients too. So I just wanted to go check out her work as well.
Yeah, links are in the show notes for that. She'll also talk about it towards the end of our conversation. And yeah, we don't have a whole lot else to say other than definitely stick around. This is absolutely amazing. And once again, thank you, Kat.
For anyone who's a premium subscriber, we're going to jump right into the interview now. And for anyone else, we will go through a few very brief announcements. Brief today, right?
Brief today because, well, there's not a whole lot to talk about.
First up, if you're not familiar with the premium subscription, it is a way to skip these announcements up front, jump right into the interviews, but don't worry, you still get important dates in the outro. To sign up, go to our website, normalizingnonmonogamy.com, scroll down on the homepage, you can find buttons right there.
Yeah, on your way down to the bottom of the page, you'll go right by some pictures of people wearing these amazing shirts that say give love. You could give yourself some love by buying one of these if you'd like.
Yes.
Yeah, they're always available, and we'd love for you to check them out.
And while you're there looking at the shirts, there's pictures of people in the shirts, and those people are amazing members of our community.
Yeah, just like Kat.
Just like Kat.
Speaking of our community, Emma, it's almost like you brought that up.
It's almost like I brought this up for a reason.
So our virtual community is a place of love, support, kindness, care, and all of the things. If you are looking for people like yourself, or maybe you're like, I don't know, these might be my people, they might not be. Well, what better way to find out?
Try it out.
Than to try it out. It's a couple of bucks a month. You get a men's group, you get a women's group. You also get all day, every day, ongoing chats and support inside of a private app, a forum, just for you, just for us, almost 300 people from all over the world. We'd love to have you check it out. We'd love to have you join us. Again, Kat is one of those amazing members, and so many others very similar to her.
To sign up, did you say this part?
I did not.
To sign up, go to our website, normalizingnonmonogamy.com, and click on the community tab. You can find out all of the information right there.
Correct.
I may have just
zoned out
for a moment.
Fair enough. I was talking at great length, so fair enough.
I just wanted to add that in. And last but not least, our favorite way to get tested for STIs. It is the service that Finn and I use. It is called stdcheck.com. And it is really fast, efficient, and discreet. It's our favorite way, as I said, to get tested.
It's also super affordable when you use the links in the podcast player show notes or on our resources page of our website. You save $10, which brings the cost of a 10-panel test all the way down to $129, which is a steal.
Yes.
And it also helps support the show financially, which we are grateful for, so we can keep bringing you all of these amazing interviews with people like Kat.
And a final reminder, go to our website and check out the Contact Us button. You can send us a voicemail, send us an email. We would love to hear from you, as always. If you want to come on the podcast, if you want to share some comments, questions with us, we'd love to hear from you.
And with that, I suppose we will just jump right into the interview with Kat, and we will see you all on the other side of this global adventure we're about to go on.
Let's go. Welcome to the podcast, Kat. We're excited to have you here today and to get to know more about you and dive into your story. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk to you and put my story out there.
Yeah, amazing. Well, let's maybe just start with a little bit about who Kat is and what maybe inspired you to reach out to be here today.
Yeah, so my name is Kat Valentine. I am 36 years old. I'm bisexual and polyamorous. And I wanted to reach out to be here today because, I have recently kind of gone through the journey of coming out, and it is kind of just another step in being my authentic self in a public forum. And then also, I am a therapist that specializes in working with non-monogamous folks. And so I do want to get my voice out there for that as well.
Awesome.
Amazing. Yeah. We'll definitely dive into your work in a little bit. But before we do, we'd love to get to know the origins of Kat's non-monogamous journey. Where did that start? How did that start? When did it start?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, like a lot of folks, there were probably some early signs. And, as young as 14, my very first makeout session was with a group of folks before going to a Rocky Horror Picture Show. And so I had my first French kiss with a woman who I had a little crush on for a little bit. And then my first French kiss with a dude, a couple of minutes later. So that was kind of my first non-monogamous experience, but I didn't identify as non-monogamous until college. And then in the middle, I almost got into a triad in high school as well, where I had two friends that I would hang out with a lot, and we were always flirtatious with each other. And he and I kind of kissed one time and thought it might be going somewhere, but I just didn't really like the kiss very much. And so then it didn't. And then I started dating her, and we did date for a little bit, but, but yeah, but the first official non-monogamous relationship wasn't until I was 20. I was living in Scotland. So I was born and raised in Atlanta and then went to Scotland for my undergrad. And I went on an OkCupid date, not knowing that this guy was non-monogamous, but he did tell me the first time that we went out. And I was kind of like, well, I mean, I'm interested in this guy. I guess I'll give it a try. And if I don't like it, then, we can break up and it'll be fine. And if I do, then great.
Well, it sounds like you weren't super closed off to at least the concept. If you were flirting with the idea of a triad that didn't really pan out, but also, high school relationships, what are they really other than just a big pile of
adventures,
adventures and experiment? I think that's a perfect way to describe it.
Yeah, though it was kind of an interesting thing for me because I did grow up in the Baptist church, and just before all of this started happening, I had taken a vow of chastity when I was 14 as well. and so then, I soon after the vow of chastity, I realized I had a crush on a girl for the first time and started having makeout orgies. And
hopefully it was a short-term vow, just like for the next hour.
Well, unfortunately not. Like I stayed pretty Christian all throughout high school. I was kind of like struggling with that for some time.
Yeah.
And then kind of officially decided to forsake my vow, to like leave that in the past when I was like 19 years old.
Wow. But still, like, that must have had a huge impact on those formative years as
Yeah.
you're navigating these like potential crushes and potential relationships, but also under this veil of growing up in the Baptist church and all of that.
Yeah, exactly. So there was like a fair amount of kind of shame and things like that. But I was really fortunate. I'm very thankful for the Sunday night sex show with Sue Johansson.
Oh, yes.
Um, so like that show, like single-handedly, provided kind of an opposing voice to the shame around sex that I was exposed to in my religious community.
That is amazing. You know what? I
Yeah.
think that might be the first time that show has come up on this podcast.
It might be.
And I don't know how, because I watched that with my roommates in college. We were always like, hey, Talk Sex with Sue is on. We'd fire up the television and all sit around and have a beer and watch Talk Sex with Sue. So
Exactly. Yeah, I was like, that's really the way that sex education should be. And I'm just like so glad that I saw that when I was like 15, 16, 17. And that kind of acted as a counterpoint to what I was being exposed to.
yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's amazing though, for you to be able to come through high school, as you were saying, like navigating all of these crushes, you revoke the vow, just, it sounds like coming out of high school, but then you jet off across the ocean and like, just, it sounds like your world opens up in a big way at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think that was part of the reason I went to Scotland. I was kind of deciding between staying in Atlanta and going to Georgia Tech, or going off to Scotland for school. And I did kind of want a place where I could just really explore who I was without the influences of my parents and, the religious community I'd grown up in and all of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm curious. I know you went on this date with somebody at OkCupid, but what I can imagine, like, you come through high school, you revoke your vow, and now you're across the ocean, you're in college, you go on a date, and he talks about non-monogamy, and I feel like there's a series of things here that must have just kind of blown your world open a little more.
Yeah, I mean, it was like I was still in a place where even with him, I told him that like I wasn't going to have sex right away for sure, and that like we might never have sex. And actually, I think that might have been part of the reason non-monogamy was a little bit attractive to me, because I was coming out of my vow of chastity, but also still didn't necessarily want to jump right into having sex. And I was of an age where there was a little bit more of an expectation of like, there's going to be a sexual relationship. And so having like, oh, he can have sex with this other partner of his, and then we can kind of take things at a pace that feels comfortable for me. I think that was part of the appeal of it.
Yeah, totally. Well, and I'm curious, how did that, after the first date, how did it sort of move forward with you two? Was that sort of the dynamic that you established, or did it change and morph from there?
Yeah, like he already had another partner who was like a friends with benefits kind of relationship. And he let me know about that from the start, but that he was still kind of looking for a girlfriend. And so I did become his girlfriend, and he did also entice me by being like, well, you could date me and another woman. And I was like, that does sound nice, actually. And then, he wanted to have a threesome. And so I did kind of try to arrange that with like an ex of mine who was still a friend at that time. And initially she was kind of like, no. But then, like, at the end of term, we were all kind of in a celebratory mood. She was like, why don't you call him up and like have him come over for a threesome? And so that was actually my first time having sex, was in a threesome as well. So
That's amazing.
Yeah. Actually, like, yeah, I can see actually a lot of benefits to that in some ways, because it's overwhelming, I imagine. It's also take some of the pressure off, maybe?
yeah. And it was just like, it was nice having her there. Because she was someone I felt very comfortable with. We had dated for 3 months about a year before, and then we'd been like close friends since then, who also like kind of made out most weeks at like the LGBT party. And so it was like comforting having her there. And then he was like kind of my present relationship. And then I did go on and date the two of them for a little bit after that. And then he and I broke up, and I kept dating her for a little while. And then, yeah, in terms of the actual kind of the first threesome, it was just kind of a fun time, and did feel kind of lower pressure in some ways than like, okay, losing the virginity.
Yeah. That's such an interesting thing to like really reflect on, I think, is the idea, right, that having sex for the first time can be really overwhelming, especially the weight that was put on it for you and that you put on it yourself.
Mhm.
And then to arrive in that place where you're like, well, I'm going to do all of these new things at once. And I think also it sounds like you're exploring your sexuality. I mean, that's probably also pushing back against the church and all of your family as well. So like just sort of like unwrapping this giant box of like middle fingers to religion in some ways.
Yeah. And there was an element of that too. Like, he also was my first like kinky relationship as well. And so then it was like quite a stark, like, here I am at 17, 18 years old, and I have a vow of chastity, and I've never done anything below the belt, to like, here I am at 20 years old, and I'm like having a threesome, getting kinky, have a boyfriend and a girlfriend. Yeah.
I'm excited to get to the part of the conversation where we talk about how this all landed for your family when you're like, I feel like we're jumping ahead a little bit.
Though I did come out to my mom as bisexual when I was 16, so that was kind of in that period. But I was kind of waiting to come out to my dad until I had like a long-term relationship with a woman, and that didn't happen for a while. So that happened a little later on.
Yeah, I mean, if you're open to talking a little bit about it, I'd be curious to hear how that exploration of your sexuality really went for you through those formative years while you're deep in religion. I mean, it sounds like you're able to come out to your mom, but probably not. It sounds like it was a little bit scary as well.
Yeah, it was. So, when I first realized I had a crush on a girl, I was 14, and it was kind of a big shock for me. Obviously, I did kiss her that year, so, it wasn't, something that I had some openness towards from the get-go, but was also did kind of go through a process of feeling like I needed to like pray the gay away, like where I would kind of ask God, like, if this isn't your will, then take it away from me. But then I found that like I still had this attraction. And then when I was 15, I had my first girlfriend. And it was just like honestly one of the most beautiful things that I had ever experienced, of like falling in love with this girl. And that was really my first dating relationship. And so, it was just kind of that whirlwind romance, and it didn't feel like this seedy, devious thing. It felt like this like beautiful, wholesome thing. And so that kind of, there was a certain emotional logic for me of like, usually when I do something bad, like I lie or something, or I, steal something little from a friend or something like that, that I feel bad. Like it feels bad in my body, and it doesn't feel that way at all, except like later when I'm like reflecting on it and being like, ooh, was this a sin? Did I do something bad? But the actual experience of it just feels like this beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think it's such a I think it's a powerful experience to go through as a way to deconstruct that. And I'm not like trying to shit on religion here, but it's so hard, right? You're a kid trying to figure out, I mean, life in general is confusing. And then you're having these beautiful experiences with somebody that you're falling in love with that is also like taboo. You're having to worry, am I sinning? What am I going to hell? Having to repent, like, geez, oh, Pete's, to be unpacking all of that. Well, you're just like, but I didn't feel guilty. And I think that's such a powerful recognition that it didn't feel bad to you.
Yeah, yeah. And then I was also at like a Christian private school in the South. And so I was also like afraid that I might be expelled if I was like found making out with my girlfriend. like, um, but I did kind of, so there was a period of time where every week I would go to this little chapel during my church services. Like after, can't remember if it was during church or during the like youth service time, but where I would just like go and talk to God for 30 minutes to an hour in this tiny little chapel. And during that period where I was just really trying to figure all of this out. And I feel fortunate that there was this, even though Baptists are not known for kind of a forgiving nature towards homosexuality, but my church did kind of encourage you to have a personal relationship with God. And so it did feel possible to kind of pursue that and have kind of this one-on-one conversation with God in my mind at that time. Somehow through all that, like I did get to a place where I was like trying to start a gay straight alliance on my campus. And, we didn't quite, we, we got permission to have like one event and we did that. And then some parents complained. And so then they're like, okay, no, you're going to have to be off campus, but we encourage you to keep meeting off campus, and so we did continue meeting off campus. And then my principal like called me up one summer and was like, can you come and talk to the faculty about marginalization on campus? And I was like, do you want me, like, is it okay if I talk about homosexuality? And
Yeah.
he was like, yeah, you can say whatever you want. And I was like, okay. And so then like I ended up coming out to my entire faculty at my high school and like telling them my story and how, they could treat queer kids with kindness and respect and, just not make them feel completely unwelcome on campus. And that was important for me because like I had felt scared. Like I really wasn't sure if I would be kicked out of school because of my sexuality.
And I have to ask, like, how did that all go?
It went fine. Like there were some, LGBT teachers who were very touched by it. And then, I had one teacher that I had at the time who was actually a friend's father. And my friend did come up to me and say, like, my dad said that you just like came out to the whole faculty for no reason. And I was like, there was a reason, but he wasn't like super rude to me or anything. It just was, unfortunate that that he didn't really see any purpose to it. But no, like the teachers were mostly kind to me, and fortunately, like I did have a couple of mentors at my school who I did feel very safe to open up to, and that was important, especially when I wasn't sure like how my parents would react. And I did end up leaving my church because I didn't think that my church would be kind of a safe place to come out.
Yeah.
And that was separate from your school.
Yeah.
That's amazing, Kat. I just give you so much credit I mean, the stuff I was doing in high school pales in comparison to having to do activism work. And so I think it's very admirable and powerful work to be doing at any age, but let alone in high school. And yeah, I think it launches you across the ocean into, I think I always love this part about these stories when it's like, I grew up in this way. And then pretty soon it's like, well, now I'm kinky and poly and having threesomes. And that's what the church did for me. And I kind of love that, like a little bit of stick it to them, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it was also that I had to really decide what my moral principles were. Like as an 18, 19-year-old, I was really like, kind of leaving behind some of the moral principles that I had been raised with, but also wanting to find what still resonated with me. So I did read a lot of books on Buddhism, and I went to like my first meditation retreat. So I was reading Thich Nhat Hanh and Nhat Hanh, I think it is, yeah. And so and then collecting some more like humanist principles. And so I did kind of take on more of a, I want to do what makes me happy. And I feel like as long as I'm not harming anyone else when they don't want to be, then there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
So I'm curious, where did you go from? Well, the threesome you dated each of them for a little bit, and then from there, where does your journey go?
Yeah. So after them, I had like another kinky non-monogamous person who I dated, and like he had another long-term relationship. And then I was back on OKC, and I found this other guy who I was really excited about, and we started dating, and he's lovely, and we had, this wonderful kind of whirlwind first few months. And then kind of a few months into our relationship, so he also advertised himself as being polyamorous. But then at this point, like a few months into the relationship, when we were falling in love, he was kind of like, so could we be monogamous actually? and and I was like, well, I mean, I guess I'm willing to try monogamy again. Like it was still early enough in my non-monogamous journey that I was like, yeah, I don't know, like I've been enjoying non-monogamy, but I'm not 100% like this is definitely how I want to be forever.
This is still while you're in Scotland, right?
Yeah. So this is still in Scotland. It's my final year of college. And so I'm like, I'm willing to give it a try. But I was kind of like, but I will probably want to fall in love with a woman again at some point. And that was kind of my, so it was a for now, not a forever kind of thing.
Yeah.
But he and I dated for 2 years, and that kind of took me into the post-college period. I moved to London, and then I ended up breaking up with him, and then immediately returned to non-monogamy, and was then like kind of knew that I wanted to be non-monogamous forever.
Did the threads of kink and play in that way still come through as you were navigating that monogamous, and then once you transitioned back into non-monogamy?
Yeah, for sure. My relationship with him was kinky, and when I moved to London, I was kind of wanting to explore the kink scene there because is like a big thing. And that was harder, like being monogamous as well and kind of navigating that. But as soon as we broke up, then I had a lot of fun in London. Little hot girl year.
Perfect.
Got it. There was this lovely woman that I dated, and then, we had a threesome that that relationship began and ended with a threesome with two different people. That was like a 3 or 4 month relationship. And then after that, I dated a couple. I dated this guy in Scotland, who I ended up being with for 2 years. So we'll talk a little bit more about him. But dating a couple was kind of an interesting experience too. And then there's also kind of a friends with benefits I had that started in London and kind of continued as a friendship for many years after that.
Yeah.
What a lovely, I don't know, like experience to have too in your early 20s, to be able to try different things and connect with different people in different ways and see what works best for you too.
Yeah. That was also the time. So I'd been kind of slowly transitioning out of Christianity. So I was Baptist, then I was Episcopalian, then I was Quaker, and then in London I was Unitarian Universalist. And then towards the end of my time in London, I was finally like, no, I think I'm agnostic now. I leave you behind Christianity.
Yeah, which is an important, thing to add too, because that's part of your whole journey and definitely impacted, I imagine, everything along that journey too.
Yeah.
You mentioned the more significant relationship, I guess, longer relationship in Scotland, and I wanted to give you a chance to talk about that if you wanted to.
Yeah, so that started so I was talking to that guy, I'm going to call him Peter, and we started talking when I was in the relationship that ended up being monogamous, where I was trying to arrange, where there was like a period of time where my then boyfriend and I were like monogamish, and he was like, well, I might be okay with like a threesome or a foursome. and so then I was trying to arrange a threesome or a foursome, and then I brought it to him and he was like, I don't know. So this guy in Scotland, Peter, he was someone I started talking to at that point, and then we just, that didn't work out, but I kept kind of talking to him online every once in a while, but we had never met in person. And so then we met up in Scotland, and he was my first sub. So I had had other doms before. I always kind of knew that I was more interested in being dominant, but early on in your kink journey, when you're just like, I don't know anything about this, and I just want to learn some things. It's a little bit easier to kind of step into a submissive role to kind of try that out. And I had one scene with a friend of mine who was a sub where I took on the dom role, but I hadn't had a relationship where I was the dom. And so that was my first one. And so we started dating when I was living in London and he was in Scotland. And then I moved to Singapore, and he decided that he wanted to follow me there. And so we kept dating even when I was in Singapore. It didn't really work for him to actually move there, so it turned into more of a long distance relationship. But yeah, that continued on for 2 years.
I'm curious how the exploration continued in Singapore. We've talked to some people from Singapore, and they're sort of, the ability to do this is much harder because of the culture and even some of the laws. And I'm just curious, First of all, I want to just say, like, your ability and drive for adventure is amazing. And I want to come back to that in a little bit, because I think seeing the way that you pushed against all of the ways that you were raised and maybe all of the sort of social norms, I think is just like a really powerful theme through all of this. And I'd love to talk a little bit more about that as we go through this. But what is life in Singapore like for you?
Yeah. So first, like, I got to Singapore. I was decided to apply to some PhD programs, and I applied to one, or I was interested in working with one researcher who I originally thought was going to be at UT Austin, but he had actually recently moved to Singapore, and but still encouraged me to apply to the PhD program there. And so I was like, well, that sounds great. They'll, can go to Singapore. They'll pay me to get my PhD, and I can travel around Southeast Asia. And,
Yeah, that's amazing.
Sign me up.
yeah, so that's what I did. And yeah, pursuing all of this in Singapore is a little bit interesting. Definitely harder to find women to date non-monogamously in Singapore, though the place where most of them are is the kink scene. And so, that was a big part of my friend group in Singapore too, because it was a little bit more accepting of outsiders than some Singaporean communities. If you think about it, Singapore is a city state. Like, so people have the same friends that they have had since, elementary school or whatever, because they've all just grown up in one place. And so it can be hard to make more like heartfelt, genuine friendships where we really feel welcomed into someone's life, because they kind of already have all those people in their lives, and they also tend to live with their parents until they're married. And so, you don't tend to be like invited back to someone's home as often and things like that as well. And so the kink scene did have more folks who were just like really curious and adventuresome and kind of wanting to like make new friends with like kind of different perspectives on life. And so a lot of my best friends in Singapore I made through the kink scene there. And then the kink scene is much more non-monogamous than other aspects of society there. So
Yeah. Amazing. I appreciate you sharing a little bit about that, because I think the opportunity for us to talk to somebody who is globally traveled while doing their non-monogamous exploration, like the intersection of those two is really incredible. That you're learning not just a new way of relating, but new culture as you go, and it's changing frequently. Like it's just a lot. I don't know. I'm sort of in awe by that ability and by your journey through that. So I'm just grateful to share.
Yeah. Yeah, and then kink is of kind of dubious legality there. So you don't have like public play parties. There is a public munch, and then you're kind of vetted there. And then there's private play parties. Even homosexuality is technically illegal, though it's only male homosexuality because it's based on the colonial rule from England that, England's now gotten rid of, but Singapore still has, unfortunately. But even though that is the case, like, it's not prosecuted very often. So, like, the munch that we had is in a gay bar, which is like publicly a gay bar, but and so it's an interesting thing. So it's like there's a lot that's kind of permitted, but you can't be super public about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious. So much of your relational journey, I mean, really all of your sort of coming of age journey has been pushing against everything: religion, society, norms, legal battles. And I'm just like, what is the drive for you, Kat, to keep, I don't want to say doing hard shit, but I imagine it's hard shit sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I'm really just kind of pursuing my joy, and when I come up against obstacles, I'm just kind of, I'm not like, oh, well, I guess I won't do that anymore. I'm just like, well, why is this obstacle here? Like, what can we do about this? And either kind of just find a way around it, or sometimes when it feels safe, try to break it down.
Yeah, say and challenge it, right? I mean, that's what you did in high school, is challenge it and say, fine, I'll be the one to come out to the entire faculty. And I think it's amazing that your friends like, my dad just said you came out to the faculty for no reason, and you're like, no, there's a big reason.
Yeah.
Like, it's a huge reason. And so, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, and for like just leading with your ethics and morals and values, and figuring out life along the way from that lens. Is what it sounds like. You've really had to question a lot of that with growing up in the place that you did and the culture that you did, and then traveling everywhere and having those experiences, and experiencing what other cultures are like too, and having to kind of revisit that along the way. I really love what you shared so far. And I'm curious too, we're kind of in the Singapore period. What are there any other things from that period that you want to share? And then I'm excited to hear what comes next.
Yeah, so while I was in Singapore, I met my now husband there. So I was...
Yeah, that's important.
Yeah. So yeah, I was with Peter. We had started in Scotland. Now I was in Singapore, and I was part of the kink scene there, and was kind of mostly kind of casually dating while Peter and I were together. And then there was this month period, which was the only month in which Peter and I had decided to like close our relationship for 1 month, because he had like just gone through a breakup and I was just about to go and visit him for a month. And so we're like, let's just like keep things a little simpler for the moment. And of course, it's in that month that I go to a munch and I meet my husband. But the way that it happened was like, we're at this munch together, and kind of almost a love at first sight kind of moment where I see him across a crowded room, and he's wearing a suit and a corset, and he has eyeliner on, and our eyes meet. We kind of like look at each other and look away, kind of thing, and then we kind of found ourselves in the same group of people chatting. And he drops it in there. He's like, well, I've had sex with enough men to know that I'm not gay, because he knows that he could kind of come off as looking gay, and so so he wants me to know that he does date women. And then he's like, he brought this whip, and now usually you wouldn't use a whip at munches, but this was, because there's no public play parties, this munch was like kind of a mixture of a munch and a play party. Like there's like a little bit of like tying people up, maybe flogging people, but just like not super intense scenes. And so he was kind of offering to like let anyone who wanted to like use this whip that he had brought. That was like a dragon tail. And I was like, oh, I want to try it out. And so then he does like the full on tennis instructor. He's showing me how to hold it and everything. Little does he know that like in London, I went to like whips on the park in the park regularly, where I kind of knew very well how to use a whip. And so, he's telling me how to do this, and then he hands it over, and I'm like, oh, like this? And then I just crack it for him. And he's like, oh, I see you've done this before.
Amazing.
And so then we kind of exchanged numbers, but I let him know, I'm like, I can't really see you for a while. Like, it'll be like 2 months or more because I'm not seeing anyone this month. And then I'm going to go to Scotland, but then things will be kind of back to normal once I'm back. And so then we did eventually go on our first date, and it was, wonderful. And at this point, I'm still seeing Peter, though. And Peter was pretty quickly threatened by my relationship with Owen, as my husband, and I have gotten his permission to use the name and tell our story. And so it only took about 2 weeks before Peter was like, gave me a full-on ultimatum of like, it's him or me. And like Peter had been like kind of a little bit of a partner more on the jealous side, but so it mostly kind of had more casual things, even though he did have like a long-term partner of his in Scotland. And so kind of seeing me really be excited about this new person. And though I can like understand it, like we're on 2 different sides of the world and I'm an NRE, but for my part, it was just like it had just been really hard to be in a long distance relationship on 2 sides of the world. And we didn't really know when that was going to end. There wasn't really like a stopping point to that. And so I was kind of like, I don't think that this is really working to just kind of not be able to have serious relationships here in Singapore and not know exactly when we're actually going to live in the same country.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended things with him and kept dating Owen, and that's kind of how that began. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Amazing. That sounds, I mean, it's quite the journey, right? Like you have to figure out, that's a common thing of like, I'm in this relationship and then I have this new relationship and you have to figure out how to balance that. And I think, in your case, the distance also has a big impact, right? Like I think I can see why it was hard, might have been harder for Peter with the jealousy when you're an NRE, especially being so far away apart from each other.
Yeah.
And you're got to remember, you are all still fairly young. So
Hey, we still are fairly young.
I know, but still, like, I know, like, I don't know. I feel like in your 20s, a lot, like, you're just figuring a lot of things out. And,
well, it's an interesting place to land too, where you're in a non-monogamous relationship having to make a choice in an ultimatum. And and I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with ultimatums and all of that. I mean, there's a whole lot of heated debate around those, but I think, right, we ultimately get to a place where Peter gets to say, I'm not able to do this unless these things happen, and you get to say, I'm not willing to do that, right? So everybody gets to choose.
Yeah.
But that's also really counter to the structure that you were in. And so I think it's just hard to do, right? Yeah. Across the world, to end a partnership, starting up a new one, like it's just so much. I mean, that's life. That's the humanness of relating.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so you start dating Owen.
Yeah.
More seriously. It's in
Well,
Singapore.
Teach him a thing or two about whips, I hope.
Yeah. Yeah. Tell him a few things about whips. It's in Singapore. We start dating. Initially, it's supposed to be still like pretty casual, because he didn't know how long he was going to be living in Singapore. He thought he might have to go back to the States at some point because he is from the States as well and had been sent over by, like, he was an assistant general manager for a fine dining restaurant and then was sent over to Singapore to open one there, in the same kind of role, and was initially supposed to just be there for a few months as the opener and then come back. But he ended up kind of being in a more permanent role, but then yeah, so we had a few months together there. That was like beautiful, wonderful. Yay. I finally get to be in the same place as my boyfriend. And because also my relationship before Peter was also long distance, but it was shorter long distance. So it was like I was in Scotland and he was in England, and we could see each other on like, it was a 4-hour train ride, not a 24-hour flight.
Right.
And so I'd been in long distance relationships for 4 years by that point, and I was like, yay, I'm good to be in the same place as my partner. And then about 4 months in, he's offered a job in Hong Kong. That's been kind of like the next step in his career ladder that he's been hoping to get. And he decides to take it because it is something that he's been looking forward to. And, we were still pretty new at that point. And, I never asked him to stay because like I didn't want to get in the way of that dream. But I also, was kind of like, I don't think that I can continue the relationship just because like I don't want to be in a long distance relationship, but I still want you to go if that's what you think is best for you. And so he did, and we thought we were going to break up, and then we just couldn't break up. And I figured out that actually it was less painful to stay with him and do another long distance
than to break up.
Yeah. Plus, it was more manageable. Again, it was a 4-hour flight, not a 24-hour flight, and I could go and like spend a weekend with him each month, and that was more doable.
Mm-hmm.
I'm waiting for the moment when this gets easier for you, and I hope it's coming.
Yeah, it is coming. So, but it was that way for about a year. He was in Hong Kong and I was in Singapore. And then towards the end of that time, I asked him to marry me. We had been together for a year at that point, and I asked him to marry me and come back to Singapore. But I also knew that he was pretty miserable in his job there, so that he and like had a chance to come back to Singapore as the general manager, so still kind of have a higher role than he had before. And so he did that and finally got to live in the same place as engaged people together.
I'm curious too. I recognize like throughout this relationship, the first year with Owen and then moving into engagement, were you two still dating other people? Were you still non-monogamous at that point?
Yeah, so we were still non-monogamous, though we were pretty into each other. And so like I might call us kind of monogamish at that point, where mostly, he wasn't really seeing anyone because he was just working like actual 15-hour days at his work. And he and I have a kinky relationship too. And so I had him in chastity a lot of that time. So then you can kind of like fetishize not being with anyone else at the same time. And so then I was like just kind of casually seeing people, not really having anyone that I was consistently dating, but also not totally monogamous either.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So then you get back together in the same location and in Singapore.
Yeah. And then at that point we had like an open to like, you might call it hierarchically polyamorous relationship. So we were very much in the kink community, and there was like, I had a friends with benefits that was part of that community as well. And so we would go on dates together and had like quite a close relationship. But neither of us were kind of looking to fall in love with anyone else. We also knew that we were going to be moving back to the States at some point. So, and like moving two people across countries is hard enough. So we weren't kind of looking to form another kind of long-term partnership, but we also still prefer having relationships where we have like a sense of care with that person. So that's kind of, we had mostly friends with benefits in that kind of period. And that went quite well. And everyone kind of knows everyone. It is a small kink scene, which is where most of the non-monogamous dating was happening. So everyone's just kind of friends with each other, and it's kind of nice.
Which I imagine is also a challenge. I think it's a good challenge of having to be friends with your former partners or your exes, because the community is so small that you can't really poison the well, or there's really no opportunity. And so I'm curious what that did that sort of influence how you moved forward in sort of your relationships, how you transition relationships, how you care for them? Or did you notice a difference there, being that it was smaller?
It was kind of an interesting thing. I mean, in some ways, neither of us really had any breakups. Like, it was more that we did have these friendships that were sometimes sexual, and sometimes the sexual element went away, but we were still friends with these people.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah. So sounds like it was very fluid, just sort of everyone was really trying to do well by each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so we happen to know you come back to the US. We cheated and looked ahead in the book.
Yeah. Yes. So after I finished my PhD and he was going to have given a chance to come back to LA as a general manager for a fine dining restaurant, we did that. So we moved to Los Angeles, and we've been in Los Angeles since then. That was around 2015, 2016. So we've been here for, I can't do math right now, but
Eight-ish
years. Yeah.
Yeah.
And when we first got back, it was a hard time for me because I was trying to kind of make it in academia, and that wasn't going super well. I don't know if you know anyone who's gone on that journey, but it tends to be a shit show for a lot of people.
Not easy one.
Yeah.
Easy one.
So I was like working as an adjunct where, you're just like not paid a lot and you're working part-time, and they won't give you full-time shifts because then they'd have to give you health insurance and all of that. And so I kind of went through some depression around that time, and I wasn't dating a lot, and he was also kind of getting back on his feet in the States and busy. Like, that's kind of a theme for him throughout. It's just that, like, his work means that it's hard for him to date a lot. So neither of us saw other folks a lot at that time, but we were still non-monogamous. I still had some conference friends with benefits where, like, I would see them every year or so at these like academic conferences, and they were lovers consistently in that way.
It's a beautiful dynamic, that sort of comet. We kind of know what to expect, and there's not a whole lot between it. I think those are super valid, and I think really powerful connections as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And then he had kind of a long-term comment that he's had since before we were together, that he still kind of has to this day. Though that's also been one of the harder relationships for me because she is another dom, and like that, it's kind of the hardest thing for me to wrap my head around. It's like, I really want to be able to just like be totally okay with that, but it feels like I'm losing some of my power, and it's hard for me to like get past that feeling. But over the years, like, we have found ways to make it a little bit easier. Like, he likes to take dates out on expensive meals because he's in the restaurant industry. And so we've kind of set up a separate little bank account for him to like just like set aside $50 a week, so that then like there's not this sudden charge that, because I manage the finances generally, so then I'm like, oh, I wasn't expecting this, big balance to come out, and so this is just a way of like budgeting for that,
Yeah.
and so yeah, like he's very not jealous, like, which has been lovely, and then I'm not a super jealous person. A lot of times it's not very hard for me for him to date folks, but thumbs are the one exception.
Which makes sense because that's like something that, pings a part of you that is near and dear to your heart. And so it's like, of course it's like a little bit harder.
Yeah.
Well, and it sounds like it's a pretty large piece of your dynamic with Owen, that it's very core to your relationship. And so I think it's, not that this is always easy for anybody, but if you say, well, I'm not really interested in this thing, it's a little bit easier for somebody to go and find somebody else who can maybe meet that need. But if you're like, we're super passionate about this thing and you're finding that same connection with somebody else, that's hella threatening.
Yeah. And I should say that somewhere in here, I think it was actually right before we moved back from Singapore, we did get married. and we did talk about, like, before we got married, like, kind of what we were comfortable with in the scope of non-monogamy for our future as, couple. And we did kind of agree that anything from being like monogamous and maybe having like an occasional threesome or having a partner in another place to kind of full on non-hierarchical polyamory were all kind of options for us, but that we didn't really ever want to be totally totally monogamous at any point. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that you had those discussions again too, like, and it sounds like continue to have them throughout your relationship of kind of reevaluate where are we at now and where are we at now?
Yeah.
And I'm curious kind of like, where has that all led you to today?
Where are you now?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So we have been, becoming more non-hierarchically poly, though obviously like we are married and we've been together for 12 years. So I call it like non-prescriptively hierarchically poly because, our lives are entwined in ways that won't happen overnight with new folks, but I have been dating more with the, option to fall in love with folks and develop long-term relationships with people. And I did just get out of a relationship where, I was with a woman who I did fall in love with. And we did have that. And that was actually kind of the first time that had happened for me, where I was in love with two people at the same time. And unfortunately, that relationship just ended, but I still really value kind of being able to have that experience for the first time and look forward to having that again, though I'll probably kind of go through a little bit of a rest period in between of like not looking for anything super serious right away,
Yeah.
Time to heal, time to grieve, recover.
Yeah. And with that also came coming out to my parents as being polyamorous.
That was going to actually be my next question of like, how has it gone with family? So yeah.
So, I didn't tell my parents for a long time about the polyamory. I did come out to them as bisexual. And that was, okay. It was neither like, oh, that's great, or like, you're no longer our daughter, but somewhere in between of like, we're not thrilled, but we still love you.
This is for the bisexuality conversation.
For the bisexuality conversation, yeah. But with poly, so I, until more recently, we would have called our relationship open rather than polyamorous. Though obviously we did acknowledge that possibility pretty early on to develop that at some point. And so when it was kind of more in the, like, we have friends with benefits, like these are our friends and there is some sexual component, there was less of a feeling like, oh, I really need to tell my parents, because it did feel kind of like, well, that's something that happens in the bedroom and it doesn't feel strange to say, like, this is my friend. But as things did become more polyamorous over time, and I was wanting to have these kinds of relationships where there might be someone who's kind of becoming part of my family, then I wanted to be able to talk to my parents about that. And so then I did come out to them this past December.
Oh, just a few months ago.
Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I told them that I had a girlfriend and that Owen and I were still well and good. And I did have like Owen join me for that Zoom conversation. And then I was going home to visit them after, but I kind of wanted to give them a few weeks to wrap their heads around it before seeing me in person. And also didn't want to totally take over the Christmas holiday with like surprise. um, and so yeah, and yeah, it was kind of similar to the bisexuality, where they're kind of like, that is a thing, and we're not excited about that, but we also still love you. And they actually did better than I thought. Like the very first conversation went much better than I was expecting, where my dad was able to just kind of jump into like the well, where is she from and what does she do, like, and that is kind of the response that I want to get from people.
Yeah.
But then, like, I did get an email from him a little later being like, well, you don't owe us anything anymore, but you do owe Owen something, and I want to make sure that, like, he's okay with this, and that you're still, like, I don't know, respecting him or something like that. And I'm like, yep, he's totally fine with this. And,
Yeah.
I do make sure that he still feels loved and appreciated and all of that.
Don't worry about Owen. He's locked up and safe.
Yeah. Yeah. And my mom did kind of sit down and like ask me several concerned questions, but while like there is a little bit of like, well, you're asking me all of these kind of concerns, but not really providing a lot of room for the like excitement of it, they were also questions that like are things that we do think about in the non-monogamous community of like, well, if you're all excited and falling in love, like, is Owen going to feel left behind? And it's like, well, I mean, like, well, that's, I don't totally love that. That's like the first question that is a valid question. Because, we do think about that when you're in a new relationship, you feel this NRE, and it can cause you to kind of neglect your existing partner sometimes. And it did also like provide her some reassurance that I had kind of thought through those things, and that those are things that I'm conscious of, and I'm not just kind of entering into without thinking about.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, at least it seems like a fairly caring question, right? It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't, yeah, how are you going to square this up with the Lord? It was.
Yeah. And she did actually address that explicitly of like, I can't remember exactly how she phrased it, but she was like, maybe, I don't think that you're just like going to hell because of this, or that, that this is like unforgivable or something like that. And, you know, so she did kind of say that, and that was something that was on my mind of like, is this going to be the bridge that's just like too far for them, where now they're like, my child is a heathen and I can't associate with her anymore.
Which is scary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, as you said, like, you would like to have a more positive response. And at least it seems like they're giving it some thought and they're coming to you with questions. They're not shutting you out and going to other places with questions, right? So, or maybe they are going to other places with questions, but they're also coming to you,
Yeah.
which is really good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for everything that you shared. I know that we could definitely keep talking for hours, but I'd love for you to just talk a little bit about the work that you do and share about that and where people can find you.
Mhm. Yeah. So, kind of in leaving academia, I started over in my career and became a marriage and family therapist. And so now that's what I'm doing. And I work largely with non monogamous folks, kinky folks, LGBT folks. And so I encourage anyone in the state of California. I work with telehealth, so I can see anyone in California that wants to have a therapist who understands non-monogamy to reach out.
And who's pushed back against a hell of a lot. and,
Yeah.
and lived all around the world. Your story is amazing, Kat. I'm grateful that you shared it. And honestly, like in some ways that you've lived it, because I think at any point in there, it would have been so easy to say, shit's too hard. Like, I'm going to simplify, I'm going to make it easier. But it seems to drive you in a way that you keep coming back and you keep maybe doing it better and better and trying to figure out ways that just really work for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I have just, I don't know. I'm glad that from a pretty early age, I decided to craft a life to suit me rather than like shaping myself to suit kind of what was expected of me. And I'm always happy to help other people do the same.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I have one more question if you're good with it before we let you go.
Yeah.
And maybe it's an impossible one to answer at the moment, but looking ahead, is there some big thing that you have to push against next that you haven't taken the leap to do it, but you kind of see it coming?
I mean, the one thing that I see is just kind of being able to marry multiple people. Like I do hope that I have another long-term partner at some point, and it is a bummer that I wouldn't be able to marry them. And so that is kind of another thing that I anticipate pushing against, trying to figure out ways to like create some legal protection for them and all of that. And so I guess I see that as something that I will probably be pushing against in my future. And then in like more like fun challenges, I do see myself like writing a book in the next couple of years, and that should be an adventure too.
Awesome. I can't wait.
And we'll get to bring you back on and help promote that and all the things. So yeah. Well, before we let you go, is there anything that we haven't asked you about, that you haven't gotten to talk about, that you wanted to get out in the world today before we let you go?
I don't think so. Yeah, I feel like we've had a good, kind of well-rounded conversation, and I hope we get to do this again sometime.
Yes.
We will.
So do we.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for everything, and we just hope you have a wonderful rest of your night.
Thank you. You too.
And we're back. Thank you so much, Kat, for everything that you shared. We just had a wonderful time talking to you and are excited to get your story out there. A quick reminder to anyone listening, go and check out all of Kat's work. Links are in the podcast show notes, which you can find in your podcast player or on our website, normalizingnonmonogamy.com.
Yeah, I will just echo that gratitude, Kat. Thank you so much for being here, for being on the show, for sharing your story, for taking people through your journey of deconstructing religion and all of the stuff that comes with that, and showing the world what can be done. So thank you, and thank you for being a part of our community. And also, listeners, we would love to have you join us and Kat in the community. You know how to find it over on our website, normalizingnonmonogamy.com. Click on the community tab for that. And yeah,
I think that's it.
I think that's it for today.
Next week, we have an interview with Megan and Brett. You're going to come back and listen then.
You don't want to miss it.
No, as always, every Wednesday.
Every Wednesday. All right, everybody. We will see you next week. And until then, we hope you have a wonderful rest of your week and a beautiful weekend.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for listening.